Greetings, everybody. My name is Djene Bajalan, and welcome to Gaming Materialists, brought to you by the This Is Revolution podcast, and of course, the one, the only VarnVlog. So, before we go into today's subject, let me bring on my co-host, the warrior of the left, the Muad'Dib of online socialism, C. Derek Varn. Welcome, C. Derek Varn.
Hi. Muad'Dib. So I'm a villain in the end, is what you're telling me.
Hey, is Muad'Dib a villain? Is he not a villain? Is he just a prisoner to circumstances? It's a long question, and not for today. So, let me introduce today's topic, and I'm actually very excited about today's topic. We are going to be talking about labor rights in the role-play game industry. We'll be discussing specifically the formation of the United Paizo Workers, which is going to be a labor union working with in the company Paizo. In October, Paizo Publishing, the creators of the hugely popular Pathfinder and Starfinder roleplay game systems, voluntarily recognized the formation of a union amongst its workers. However, while many have praised Paizo's decision to not resist unionization, not everything was perfect in the paradise that is Paizo. There were claims that there were inconsistent hiring practices, pay inequality across the company, allegations of verbal abuse from executives and management, and allegations of harassment that were apparently ignored or covered up by people at the top. So we want to kind of discuss this situation and the specifics, and then perhaps talk a little bit more generally about the conditions facing a lot of the creative people that bring us roleplay games. So we have two wonderful guests, who I'm really excited to have here with us today to help us talk about this. We have Mark Scheffler, who is from the UPW, the United Paizo Workers, and Isis Wozniakowska. I'm terrible with Polish names. I really apologize. And she is a freelancer who works for Paizo, so she also has some information on the situation in the company. So let's bring on our two guests. Welcome, Mark.
Hi there.
And welcome, Isis.
Hi.
So I want to begin our discussion a little bit by asking our two guests perhaps to give us an update with what the situation is with the union and the labor situation in Paizo company. We had a lot of announcements at the end of October that, Paizo had recognized the union, and now there was a process of negotiation. But of course, our viewers will probably want to know a little bit more about how that is going on, what's moving forward as we head into November.
So would your viewers want us to start in September with how it all started? Or do you think that they are already on the ball with that and just want to know what the most recent updates are?
Well, the whole updates in September would be fantastic.
Perfect. Okay. So let's get started then. And September isn't when it really all started, because there have been talks about forming a union for years. Even as like 3 or so years ago, probably there were talks that I participated in with some other people, and it kind of never made it all the way there back then. But in September, we lost two very beloved staff members from customer service, and there was people in the company didn't find out about it until they found out, basically based on how close they were to those people in social media. From that, not from the company, and the fans started finding about it in the same way. Everyone was kind of shocked and surprised, didn't know how this had started, didn't know if it could happen again, and that sort of kick-started up some more of the sentiment for the union. At the same time, and Isis can talk about this, freelancers started talking among themselves too in parallel, and those processes were kind of separate. Isis, can you give us a perspective of what was happening with the freelancers back then?
Yeah, so, I mean, we heard about it time everybody else did, with the addition that a lot And when we saw the news, it came down to a lot of this person starts talking to this person, another person starts to another person, and just conversations start popping up. And eventually, everyone ended up in a room together. I mean, this is an online room, sure, but same sentiment stands. It was at a certain point, we all started thinking, okay, well, we all have the same feeling about this. We all have the same shock. We all have the same, I don't know. I don't want to speak for everyone's specific emotional state. Suffice to say, we all started talking to each other, and talk started happening, and the question, what's our role in all this? We're connected to this company in a different way. Is it, in this case, is it ethical for us to keep doing this work? And there were just a lot of questions, and that was sort of how that side of things started out.
So to kind of sum up, there's been talk about a labor union at Paizo for a while, but in September there was a kind of inciting incident when two particularly popular members of the customer service team were removed from the company. That was something that not only workers found out about, but also customers at Paizo, and it was something that not only the people employed directly by Paizo were concerned about, but also something that you, Isis, and the other freelancers, who I assume are a big part of Paizo's workforce as well, were concerned about. And this kind
and the community too.
And
the fan community, a lot of people were concerned about it. And so basically, and I want to point this out to the viewers, Isis and the other freelancers do work on contract for Paizo. So just to understand how brave the freelancers are, because what Isis was saying, they got together and they made a private statement to the company, not to everybody out there, that they were not going to be taking work. It was a work action. It's not a strike because they're freelancers, right? But so first of all, they're not a union. They could never be part of the union because they're freelancers, and so they were not protected in any way. And they did this for us. It was brave. It was noble, and it was kind of an amazing thing.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead, Isis.
And
can you hear us?
Also, it's funny you mention that, because as it turns out, not only were we worried about we aren't technically part of the company in like a legal sense, but on top of that, we were also even a little worried that we might actually be hurting our coworkers or developers. But there was an outpouring of kind of, I don't know. There was sort of an outpouring of solidarity at the first Gen Con talks, and we all were kind of pushed in the direction that that minded that the members of the company were on our side about all these sorts of things. Can I?
Yeah.
Okay.
What Isis is saying, it was a scary time from both directions. Just like the freelancers were worried, right? We're not taking work. They're not even handing in the work that they had agreed to take, and they were getting worried whether we, the workers who hire the freelancers on freelance for hire, were going to get upset or have repercussions from that. And we were kind of worried on the opposite side because communication hadn't quite happened yet. did the freelancers not like us now? Do they feel bad about the workers? And we know they're asking for better situations here, but do they feel ill-used by the fact that we brought them on? And we quickly found out, just like Isis said, because there were live Gen Con streams, and I was actually on the first one alongside Michael Thayer and Leo Glass. And we were worried about whether or not the freelancers who came to that stream, whether they were going to be happy or upset, and whether the fans were going to come on and be very angry. And everyone in that stream was so nice to the workers, and the freelancers came in on purpose together in a group to say positive and supportive things. And so that action is kind of what set the stage and let us know what Isis was saying, that we were all together on this, even though we're from two separate groups of workers who work for Paizo. And so moving forward past that point, there was this freelancer concerted work action to not hand in assignments until certain criteria had been met. Some of those were things that would take the company a long time to be able to completely establish. And so that means that when UPW announced officially to the executives and then to the world, and was like, we're here, we're a union of Paizo workers, the freelancers could say, okay, we've had our demands from before, but if you voluntarily recognize UPW, we'll let them take it from here. And that sort of gave us sort of a bonus, as we would say in tabletop role-playing games. It was sort of a lift that made it easier to just see a path towards being accepted. And to the credit of our executive team, and thanks to the leverage from the freelancers, we were. And a lot of other unions that we heard about in the local area were not, tried to happen at the same time. There was a book reseller in the area that Half Price Books tried to unionize and was not voluntarily recognized, and they went for union busting tactics. And Image Comics tried to unionize too, based kind of like, I think they've said that they were inspired by our success, and were also do not seem to have been voluntarily recognized. So I credit the freelancers and the executives' willingness to move forward in good faith as ways that we were able to get towards that.
Well, I would definitely say that being, especially to ISIS and the freelancers, that's a very precarious situation you all are in, given that, so much work in our modern economy is farmed out to contractors who do not have the same rights as people on full employment contracts. And, that's very problematic. And it's, I do not know of too many cases where it's the freelancers who are standing up and taking the lead in kind of labor solidarity, because they're often in such a weaker position than people who are full-time employed. Varn, go ahead.
I was actually thinking about that, because one thing that we know, and we both work in left-wing publishing, which is worked in left-wing publishing in my case, is that in some of these publishing houses, 90% of the work is contract freelance work. It's not, and some of it's even uncontracted freelance work.
Mm-hmm. And don't we know it?
Yeah, it's something we're very familiar with. And so,
Paizo's not quite that high. A lot of initial writing is done by freelancers, but if you talk about the work, the labor that goes into your book, a very high percentage is done through developers or designers, editors, and the art team when they go through as well. So I wouldn't say it was at 90%, but it sure is a good percentage, especially if those initial words that come in to start the process are coming from freelancers.
Yeah. So how much do we foresee this changing, at least specifically the RPG production industry? Because Paizo's kind of in a unique spot in that there's Hasbro, Wizards of the Coast, which, are massive, super massive. whole different deal. Then there's like 1,000 tiny production LLCs, I guess, and some of them aren't even that. And Paizo's kind of in the upper middle. They're definitely, it's like them and Chaosium are number 2. That's the tier they're at. And Paizo's been in the past, it's even surpassed Wizards of the Coast in sales. Does that give it a little bit more leeway to deal with the union fairly? I'm
not actually informed enough about what kind of leeway the little companies would have to deal with unions or not. I kind of only know it from the Paizo perspective. You're definitely right that Paizo, in terms of both size, output, and generally sales, is solidly generally in second place in the tabletop RPG industry. But the behemoth and household name that is Dungeons and Dragons is also very solidly in first. And so I couldn't speak to what challenges are felt in the very small shops, but at least in Paizo, I think that the challenges that are going to happen there are because just some of us workers, not me in particular, but other members of the union have been in unions before in previous jobs. Maybe they were teachers, maybe actually several of them were teachers who were in unions before, but I don't think the management is familiar with union law, because if they've managed, they've mostly managed here or in a place that did not have a union. So a lot of that is going to be getting everyone informed, and the union has literature, and the company can hire a lawyer to help inform them on the other end and move forward towards a negotiation, which that's going to be coming up soon, and we're hoping it's going to be in good faith from both sides and be pretty productive.
Isis, what about the situation then of freelancers in general? The freelancers who work for Paizo, do they generally exclusively work for Paizo, or are they often working for several different companies at once?
It really depends. I mean, there are some of us who do Paizo contracts. There's some of us who do Paizo and other RPGs. There are some of us who do all sorts of other things. It's really not. It's not like a single way that we operate freelancer wise, but the majority of us, we do a relatively like probably a majority of our work would be Paizo, but even then, there are going to be mileage may vary on that. Yeah, for my own sake, I currently am mostly doing Paizo only, but I've also done some other stuff before. And keep in mind that a lot of us also have day jobs. Right. So we're not just, only writing for Paizo. Some of us are, doing regular things in our daily lives as well. So it's hard to pinpoint an exact, who's doing how much of what at any given time. But
yeah, speaking of day jobs and the overlap, that brings another good point, which is that some of the freelancers that work for Paizo are also the workers at Paizo, because there are essentially 3 major things that as a union UPW is looking for. And one of them is wage increases to handle the fact that we're in a very, very expensive area that is rising in cost faster than anywhere else, and that we're not paid an amount that can handle that. And there are a decent number of spots that are below where MIT calculated the living wage.
Right.
Even in somewhere like the editorial department, where you have to have a technical skill to write or edit for it, that requires like a pretty significant job search for it, right? And so that's one of the 3. The second one is work from home indefinitely, and hopefully allowance to move somewhere else where it's not as expensive. That will maybe not force the company to give us as much more money while still allowing us to live, and try to save up for retirement or owning a home or starting a family, or all things that we can't do. And then the third one is more transparency. And so one of the problems with not getting paid enough is that Paizo is already a major crunch. There's crunch is a term in the industry and other places for when you have a lot of work and it gets bottlenecked, and you either have to work lots of extra hours, especially if you're salaried and they can just do that, or work the same number of hours but pour so much like psychic energy into it that you're more exhausted than if you had worked the additional hours to get it done. And at Paizo, you not only have that, but you have a second job for a lot of people where they have to take freelance from Paizo in some cases or other places to make ends meet. Now, the relatively good thing, and I say relatively, is that Paizo freelance rates are actually reasonably close to even Wizards of the Coast freelance rates for Dungeons and Dragons. They're a little bit lower, but like the highest Paizo freelance rates are in the range of the lower Dungeons and Dragons freelance rates, which they are still too low and should increase. But if you consider that Wizards salaries are like double Paizo's salaries for the people who are at Paizo, you also start to see why the freelancers were going out to help us first. I think that we should be helping everybody and also pay more for freelance rates. But the RPG industry is a very difficult business in general, as far as I can tell. One of the real scary things about it is, for those of you who know the history of Dungeons and Dragons, right, in 1974 there was this wooden box you could get that had some like very like bindery books that were in there that were not like, they did not look professionally made like the books that we have now, right? And they had a certain number of pages. And when you look at what you're paying per page, and especially if you look what you're paying per word, because they didn't have very many words, they were in big print, they didn't have color art either. It cost less in 1974 to buy per page, and way less per word than it costs now to buy a book, which means that the margins are razor thin, and that all gets translated to, of course, the workers, and leads to crunch, making more products so that you can try to pay the workers, and a lot of other difficult situations that are pretty common in the industry, because it's not like Paizo is just underselling everybody else in the RPG industry, right? There's other issues and pressures on that as well. Like ISIS is talking about freelancers who have a day job that can support them, but they freelance for passion. There's also third-party publishers who do that too, and in some cases do that not even to make a profit. They're just like, I want to make a cool book. And so that can make it harder as well for people who want that to be their life, is that there are, in the industry, when it's about games and fun things, there is some amount that people will do it just because it's fun. And but when it's your job for a lot, right, it can drain your energy.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, because I think RPG industry, working for an RPG company is probably something that lots of people who play the games would be like, this is my dream job. But of course, when you get your dream job, it is very difficult. Well, I used to work for Games Workshop, so I know I liked Games Workshop as a hobby, but after working for Games Workshop, I needed to kind of break from the hobby, because it's very emotionally draining, because you're doing regular things. I have a very good friend who who's a very big board games fan, and people always say, hey, why don't you make a board game? You're so experienced. He's like, it's my rest thing. If I do it for a real job, it's going to be extremely difficult. So I can imagine, the fact that you have so many people who are willing to do the job underpaid really makes it difficult to get the value of what your labor is.
Yeah, and it's a problem for people who are underprivileged who want to get into the industry, because who can afford to do it while being underpaid more? It's people who have fewer student loans because of the fact that they came from a background where their parents could handle more of the cost of education, which you need in a lot of cases to be in the editorial department of a tabletop role-playing game. You need some kind of a degree. And so you're absolutely right. And it definitely is. It is overall a problem because we are underpaying for the books somewhat compared to the fact that inflation. I was not counting inflation when I said that the cost has gone down. And we're underpaying for the people who make them, and it is an issue.
It's actually kind of been fascinating for me. I was looking at production standards. I have RPG books going back 3 decades, and the production standards, even on something from, I don't know, Drive Through RPG that someone independently published, is like infinitely higher than what we would have accepted even 20 years ago. Go back and look at like a 90s White Wolf book. And yet I did do some inflation calculations, and I was like, okay, a book like this would have been $25 in 1997. It's $50-$60 now. Nope. $25 in 1997 was worth more than $55 now. So, and yet the production values have gone up. Now, I know production costs have kind of lowered, but not really. Like it's more of a matter of being able to produce at smaller scales. And this is something that Djene and I are in an adjacent industry, so like we know it from Left Wing Book Publishing, but we also have the same problem of, to get credentialed in this, you often have to work for free for years, and you either have to do it like burning midnight oil because you have a day job that really pays for everything, or you do have to come from a privileged background, and that's pretty much it. Like, and it's particularly ironic in the book field that we work in, which is left-wing book publishing. But I was wondering, though, I mean, the history of labor abuse because it's a game, and this goes back pretty far. I mean, like, I was recently rereading the history of TSR, and them doing stuff like, oh yeah, we just fired all of our art staff with no warning for no reason, just because we wanted to reinstitute a professional staff, and also they were working for like minimum wage anyway. And that that happened several times in the 80s and 90s. It does seem like with Hasbro owning Wizards of the Coast, a lot of those practices have changed. But I've also been reading, they've been trying to unionize off and on at Wizards of the Coast since at least 2010, and they've never succeeded. So,
and video game companies, I know, tried to as well. They have their own cycles of booms and busts that are different, and they are paid better than tabletop RPG industry, but they have their issues where you hire them on, they crunch to the max to get out that game, and then they fire that group of people in general once it's done. Then you have to find a new job at that point in a lot of cases. So like the games, a lot of different related games industries have this problem. Like Djene was talking about board games. Board games have it a little better in that people are definitely willing to pay more for a board game that takes an equal amount or lesser amount of work to create than they are for a tabletop RPG in a book, possibly because of all the little parts. They can justify the cost of, say, a Gloomhaven, because like a board game like that,
it's tactile. People like tactile.
Yeah, it has so much in that box. So when you get hit with the price tag, what was the initial price tag for Gloomhaven before they started doing the discounts? It was like up there around $200 or something like that, right? And when you get hit with that, you're like, okay, but I'm getting all of these things, and but when you get a book, for some reason, it's psychological, right? It's just like, oh, it's just a book. And it becomes harder to justify to yourself to pay for it, even though in some cases the amount of design from the freelancers, from the designers, developers, editors that had to go into those pages in the book might have been harder than by a significant amount than that board game that you
and got. You might get more hours out of it too.
And you get, I mean, that's what That's how I justify all my collection of games. Yeah, go ahead, Isa. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I was just saying, like, my Pathfinder rulebook. I mean, I've gotten hours and hours and hours out of that thing. Like, compared to like a board game, like maybe you'll play it every once in a while. RPG books, you use them every week.
No doubt. Yeah, I think that's, people don't realize how much time they get out of those books. I wanted to kind of like ask as well about the work culture. So you mentioned Mark, often people who can get into this industry are people who are come from privileged backgrounds anyway, because it requires education. As Varn said, that's similar in left-wing publishing. It's similar in fields like academia as well, where you have to have familial support in order to get through the difficult process to find a job. So the question comes out that means that there will be a tendency towards a particular demographic in the industry, and if you put on top of that the historical association with sort of male nerd culture, what kind of work culture issues do you think existed in Paizo and the industry in general, vis-a-vis minority groups, vis-a-vis women, trans people, homosexuals, groups that are generally, not within the, white male kind of field? Because roleplay games, especially in the last couple of years, have exploded in popularity amongst a variety, like all kinds of people, gender, race, all those groups. It's no longer the culture it was back in the 1990s when Varn and I were doing that stuff,
or the 1970s when it was just dude bros without a college degree, even. So,
how would you what are your perspectives on that, Isis?
Well, so obviously I'm not like an employee at Paizo, but I have a particular perspective on how I got into to freelancing. And I mean, for the record here, I know I have a fancy Polish name, but my father is a Polish immigrant. My mother is a Black woman. So I'm in all sorts of weird demographics for this industry. But so when people say that, getting into the industry, and like I said, I can't speak from the perspective of like actually working for a company, but to an extent for freelancing, and I say this like because it is all network. It's who do you find, who do you know, and it's kind of a shame that it has to be that. Me personally, I will attest to the fact that I perhaps got a little lucky. I met another lovely freelancer who's also a woman who saw that I had done writing before for other things, and the two of us bonded over at the time mostly Starfinder, although I had gotten into Pathfinder 2 and that boosted too. I played Pathfinder back beginning of college. I played Pathfinder 1, and then I away from it from a while because college kind of got, there was too much work going there. And when an edition came out, I kind of jumped back into session. But, I don't have like an extremely long history with it. I will say, I've maybe only been playing tabletops for like, maybe like 6 years. No, more than 6 years. I guess more like 8. But it was off and on for a long time. So, probably 2 of those years were me taking a break in college. But you're right. There has been a recent kind of, I don't want to call it an explosion, but a recent kind of surgence in tabletops. You know, probably a lot of it is due to just like the the wealth demographic of people now. It turns out playing tabletops is not an incredibly expensive hobby. It's very social. You can meet a lot of people. But there are some difficulties in, like, a lot of networking you get is conventions, and conventions can be very difficult for people from minority backgrounds. They may not have the money to travel to conventions. Or, you know, for me personally, I mean, this is just, you know, not speaking for anyone but myself, but like for me personally, sometimes conventions can be overwhelming because, as we've said before, there is a majority of generally white men who will be at these conventions, and sometimes that can be really intimidating for like a young woman, a young person of color. It can be a lot to have to take in at once. So, I mean, I got advantage of the fact that everything jumped online, and that was where I kind of got lucky that I got to build the network that way. And I also have to give my major thanks to Logan Bonner, who brought me in on my first project, trying to find more voices. So, you know, much love to him on that.
So, I can talk about it a little bit more from a perspective of being at Paizo, but I think Isis has it kind of exactly right on how it can feel for when you're networking in as a freelancer and in the sort of the population in general of players. So what we're looking at when you look at the population of gamers, in a lot of cases, you might expect that you have, you know, somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 male, somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 white, and possibly correlated with an overlap between those, such that, like I just said, it might be slightly majority white male overall across the entire demographic, and in some areas and places, way more than a majority white male, right? And that's what the player base kind of roughly is. I mean, I'm sure that there's more information out there than I would have on that. That's a ballpark, right? So then you also have the question of, what do the companies look like? At the top level, a lot of companies look kind of similar to that, because also, you know, who's been around enough to be at the top level. For instance, like Paizo's like major executives are like the CEO and founder is a woman. All the rest are white men. So it's around in that area. But when you look at two other metrics for Paizo, Paizo is way more diverse than that. And that is in the workers at Paizo, and that is in the freelancers at Paizo. Both the workers and freelancers at Paizo, especially when you go beyond white men and are asking, are we talking about cis het white men or something like that? Paizo has an extraordinarily high number of LGBTQ IA staff members, and has much better diversity than those numbers I was quoting you before among staff, and has freelancers from a lot of very diverse backgrounds and perspectives as well. And we didn't always. And that's something that the staff on the level of the workers have reached out to try to get more diverse voices who can join and talk authentically about certain kinds of topics that we think are really important. That's also part of why it felt so like potentially scary when the freelancers were first withholding work, because we had brought on a lot of diverse freelancers, and it's like, did they feel betrayed by the workers and the staff who brought them in? And we learned no, that there was solidarity, because that was like a fear. There were people who went to specifically try to reach out and to build trust.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that was a thing that we had realized coming into the that Gen Con weekend, and a lot of us, especially those of us who are from newer, like I don't want to say newer because some of us have been here for years. I've only been doing this about a year, like a little over a year now, but they're minority peoples in the freelancers for longer than that. But it came down to a lot of us wanted to make sure that when we had sent out our work stoppages, that like we weren't mad at the staff, weren't angry, and this was just we jumped into our Gen Con chats. We were we sat there and we're like, no, you keep going, you're doing up. Because we want that to continue. We don't want it to be like, we don't want to lash out at people for that. It's a good thing that Paizo is trying to do, that the staff on the ground floor are bringing other people into this industry. And we wanted to make sure that we wanted to make it very clear that this was our way to show support. This was not anything, against them.
Yeah,
I mean, that makes total sense. Vaughn, you wanted to ask something? Go ahead.
Yeah, I've been thinking about the one thing that's interesting about, again, this is Paizo's kind of unique because it's a legacy name in RPGs, but it's younger as a company compared to, say, even
White
something like White Wolf is dead, but Onyx Path, which is I guess is one of the two White Wolf successors, or even something that does subsidiary publishing for D&D, like Frog God Games or a Cobalt, which actually have longer histories than not than Paizo.
I don't think that they. Yeah, I think Frog God split off Necromancer and probably is not older than Paizo, but
yeah. But all these, but the people who run them have been in the gaming industry since a lot of times since I was born, and I'm in my 40s. So that's
fair.
Yeah. So
people
one thing
who run Paizo have been in the industry for a while too.
Mm-hmm.
Lisa Stevens and Vic Wirtz were at Wizards of the Coast, and like the reason they were able to like kind of afford to run Paizo was that they could have afforded to retire on like they were around when Pokemon cards were going around, and I think they made a lot from that, and then they saw that like a branch of Wizards of the Coast was going to get laid off, and they were like, can we do this? We'll put down money to do it. Like, so the early days of Paizo is a small, scrappy company that was just like founded with the idea of saving some particular jobs and doing the work and figuring things out. At some point, Paizo has grown to a much larger size, and as is clear at this point, potentially not learned all the lessons and built all the infrastructure necessary to support workers in this larger size that it is now. But it definitely did have its roots in people who'd been in the industry for a while.
Okay, so it is. I think Paizo though is different in the fact that it had massive success particularly during the time period of D&D 4th Ed. Being able to use its. I mean, because a lot of people used to think of it as a continuation of 3.5 D&D, even though that's not really fair, and it's definitely not true after second ed. But it's an interesting niche that it's. When I say it's unique, it really is unique, because I'm even thinking about the other big companies. One thing about the RPG world is whole companies disappear fairly quickly. Yeah. I think one of the bigger surprises was the utter collapse in White Wolf in like 5 years. Like it was just, it went from its top of the industry to non-existent. it's. Do you think that's why there's so few unionized shops? Or there's not like a freelancers guild or anything like that?
Right?
Yeah.
I think the fact of the matter is that when you're a really tiny shop, and this is a guess, I said before I don't have any data on the really tiny shops, but that when you're a really tiny shop, you might be like that scrappy starting Paizo, where you're just like 5 to 10 people and everybody knows each other and they're just all burning the candle on both ends together and trying to get things to work. Whereas when you get bigger, like Paizo, you get to a point where there are certain people who are workers, like Pathfinder 2nd Edition. It's a lot of fun. It is a massive success. But part of getting that to work and to come out on time, right? Like I was doing 100-hour weeks. Sometimes there was one 30-day period where I took one day off. I had the misfortune that someone pretty high in the company came in on that day off. It was a Sunday. Gave a pizza party to everyone that was there and then praised them on Monday at the Monday meetings. Like they came in on Sunday and then named them all by name. And I was like, that was the only day I took off this 30-day period. Whoops. Working through the holidays. When I went home for the holidays, I brought my work with me and just like kind of sat around on my computer, like with other people who were there just doing it and working really hard to get things out. But you get to a point when you're big enough, right, that you have people doing that. I'm not a unique story. I can just only speak for myself. I know I've seen other people working just as hard. But then you have some people who maybe don't visibly appear to be earning the Kindle as much on both ends as much, or are higher up in the company and are being compensated enough more than the baseline of this very expensive area. So I think that's what gets you brewing towards where a union can be helpful, is when you get big enough that the communication, it falls apart on its own, and you get to a point where you don't have enough transparency to just have the only 10 or 5 people working at the company all just get together and talk and be like, hey, did you see that Jill just put in 100 hours? Maybe we should do something about it. But once it gets big enough that things can get lost over multiple levels of the company and then have nothing happen, a union is helpful because it can bring together all of the voices of the workers. And to the credit of Paizo, like Paizo has gotten better even before the union somewhat at listening to when a lot of workers have the same ideas, either at a meeting or otherwise. Like, for example, one of the very popular ancestries in Pathfinder 2nd Edition is the Leshy. So we had a meeting that was promoting which ancestries would be in, and we have a person at Paizo, my partner Linda, who really likes Leshy. She didn't want to say it because she knew she was stereotyped as liking them, so I suggested Leshies on behalf of some of my teammates. And if we had been at Paizo when I started, the fact that all 3 of the most senior people in the room immediately said they didn't like Leshies would have been a kiss of death. But even at that point, everyone else wanted it. Like the entire rest of the editorial staff who were there, and they said, this isn't for me. But if literally everyone else, one person wanted Gripply, I won't say that he voted the way that he didn't, but if literally 19 out of other 20 people want it, we'll do something that's not for us, and that's good. But sometimes it took more than that. To give an example that I've said in another interview briefly, it's a really minor point. It's not even something that's a big deal for us, like wages or moving. But there was a point in time where, if when you're writing a book and you put in like a new character or an NPC, right? You could potentially put information about that NPC. Like in parentheses, you might say, oh, well, they're a 10th level fighter who's a human. But sometimes you want to have a character that's mysterious, like Tom Bombadil in Lord of the Rings, and it's just like, I don't know what this person's deal is. Maybe he's actually really powerful, maybe he's not. And there was going to be a mandate that was like, no, you have to put in a level and all this information anytime you put in a name. But some books wanted to include it when it was appropriate and not include it when it wasn't. And a lot of people went one-on-one to ask for it and were rebuffed. And this was before the union, but eventually there was a big product that there were 3 different products were coming out near the same time, all about the same people. And so when some of the teams were rebuffed saying, well, maybe we can just hold off because other books are coming out at the same time, we got together a group of all 3 of the books and said, okay, we need to work together to figure out what this information is, because it's going to have to be the same in all 3 of our books. And one of them was an adventure. And so it definitely would have to follow cues from the adventure, because the adventure might need that character to be level 10 so that they could be a boss encounter in the adventure or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So when we got together to do what the upper management had said that they wanted us to do, we discovered that literally everyone in those 3 groups that we created did not want to. And it wasn't just us, one person. And then we discovered that literally everyone that was not in those 3 groups, that was on those teams with those people, also didn't want to. So one person from the staff sent a message that was like undersigned by literally all of the designers and developers that said we want to do it with discretion when it makes sense and not when it doesn't make sense. And the executives were like, yeah, okay. And that shows how just like being it was explained why we wanted to do it in examples. It shows how being rational and polite and doing collective action can help. And that's how we imagine that the union is going to help, right? It's not formed. We didn't form the union to become antagonistic and try to tear down Paizo or do anything like that, because we love these books that we're putting out. We're proud of putting out the diverse content in Pathfinder that we do, but we want to have a voice that can be heard. And when the company gets big enough, one voice can no longer be heard, but the union's voice can. And we're hoping that, and we think that it's possible that just like the union was recognized by the executive team, that will come in with demands, and when they see that these are demands or requests or what we're looking for from all the staff together, that one louder voice will be enough that they say, okay, let's negotiate on this, let's do it, and go in good faith.
Follow up that?
The one thing I would say is Paizo has gotten a lot of positive press for this, and I'm rightly so, I think. Because it is so rare in the publishing industry as a whole, not just in the RPG industry, for there to be any recognized union anything. Going forward, do you think this, because the concerns will be, if I'm thinking as a dirty, rotten capitalist right now, which we don't tend to do here, but I'm going to put on that hat. In a business as low profit margin as RPGs, and that's like kind of something that we've all kind of strongly implied, but we all know that like even a profitable, successful company like Paizo, the profit margins are not large, and they only get worse as you go down. Are there any concerns that this could hurt the viability of Paizo? Maybe it'll do the opposite. How do you see that going as far as the business end of things?
So I don't think it will be capable of hurting the viability of Paizo. And the reason for that, and it's very important, because this is a question a lot of people ask. So I'm glad you took the voice of the capitalism question on this, because in a lot of places, the way that people in this country that we learn and read about unions or see them on TV, it's during some kind of big tense showdown that's between like the union and the company, and in TV often both sides are rife with corruption, right? And they're very adversarial, and their major action are taken on both sides, and then you get this drama. But in reality, in a lot of these cases, both sides kind of want to make things work. And we want a compromise. And so UPW is not like a faceless multinational group that doesn't know anything about Paizo and is going to come in and establish like some very like kind of blind to Paizo's requirements, like random thing. UPW is actually working with CWA, the Communication Workers Union, which is a union that, as far as I know, and is one of the ones that is most independent in when you form your own small union. And they're like, you can do what you want to do. We're going to support you with everything that you need to do that. And so the reason why the union is not going to or shouldn't hurt the viability of the company is because the union is attempting not to hurt the viability of the company. So if during the negotiation Paizo says, well, look, you asked for this much, in a living wage in the area, and we'd like to, but here we'll show you the financials, because right during a negotiation, financials and other information can come out onto the table and be shown to the union to help justify and make a kind of make an argument. So they'll be like, we'll show you, we don't have it, and we'd like to, but we don't. And so let's say that they do that, right? So the union is not going, if the union looks at it and does all the analysis and can't come up with anything other than, no, you're right, there literally isn't any money, then the union is made up of these extremely creative staff, just highly skilled members of the operations team who keep the company running on operation, and tech team members, people from all over Paizo. And these are the creative people who come up with a lot of the ideas. So we'll come up with some kind of an idea. I mean, we already kind of said, and I said in the interview, that letting people move to a cheaper place is something along the way, right? So we will go back if we find out that exactly what we're asking for isn't possible. We're not going to say, well, too bad, right? I guess there's no Paizo, then we're not gonna agree. Like, the union is going to try to figure out creative solutions, go back and forth, and work together, and with the executive team at Paizo, the leadership team, to try to find something that will work and that will maybe find new streams of income. There are definitely union members that I've seen even before I was in the union. Some of these people talked to me and were like, I have an idea for something that could potentially make the company money and doesn't take very much effort to do. So trying to find ways to help Paizo balance the books and to help make it work is important, because that's what the union wants to do. So I would say it won't hurt the viability, because if it's provable that it's going to hurt the viability, the union is going to work to find something else that won't, and that will get us what we need.
Well, we're running up against the hour time limit. So before we go, I thought we would just ask you perhaps to give us some recommendations about exciting roleplay game stuff that you have been checking out and you think our audience might want to check out. Anything exciting in the pipeline that you can let us know about, or anything that you have come out recently that you think is super interesting, whether from Paizo or not? Isis, do you want to take this one first?
That's a difficult question.
If you need time to think, I can give some random Paizo ones.
Well, I'm going to do a shameless plug in that everybody should play my Starfinder scenario, because it's a great Starfinder now. But
what's it called?
Name it.
What's it called?
Starfinder Society. The number is 3-21. Frozen Ambitions, Jules Blight. It is actually part 4 of a 4 series, though, the Frozen Ambitions series. So you have to kind of look into the whole thing. But
maybe they shouldn't play that without any of the other parts.
Yeah,
all 4 parts.
Yeah, play all 4. It's a good series.
Mark, anything you'd recommend for us?
Sure. So one thing about Paizo that I said before with the crunch is that we put out a lot, and there's a lot of really, really good content that's been coming out from Paizo. From Secrets of Magic, which has like all sorts of things from like treatises about the philosophy of magic in the setting, to magical spell catalysts written by Isis that let you you throw them into your spell and it does some extra effects. Secrets of Magic is really cool. On the other side, if you're more into steampunk and gears, there's Guns and Gears, which has guns and also it has gears that you can put into your game as much or as little as you want. You can put just the guns, you can put just the gears. Both of those are out. There's Lost Omens Mwangi Expanse, which is, in my opinion, it kind of sets a gold standard for how to do a setting book that is in not your traditional Eurocentric fantasy. And sets the bar high for Paizo to have to be able to continue to keep up next time we have a book that is in an area like that. Mwangi Expanse is sort of set in an area that is very akin to sub-Saharan Africa, and it has just a really huge amount of cool stuff. Lost Omens Grand Bazaar is a book that came out that has just a bunch of shops that you can throw into your game and special items that you might only be able to find at that shop that the shopkeeper can get for you. And the shopkeepers are so cool. And then coming out soon, we've got a bunch of other things coming out. So there's going to be Lost Omens Monsters of Myth, which has like really mythical monsters with legends about them and like special rules that you can use involving that monster. We've got Book of the Dead, where you can play as undead, or it's also got a bunch of undead in there. There's all sorts of, there's an undead adventure. It's got everything you need about undead, plus a really evil and scummy undead ghost necromancer who wrote a book called Book of the Dead in the setting, has like narrator voice where he'll go on and on about how he's such a tech bro for magic and necromancy. And then we also have Next Gen Con Dark Archive, which is a big exciting new book with lots of little case files, mysterious weird things, including something that I think a lot of people are going to like that is also written by ISIS, and 2 new classes, the Thaumaturge, who pull out lots of little weird objects and create connections between everything in the world around them, and the Psychic, which are your typical psychic, you know, they can read minds or do a telekinetic throws and things like that. So there's a ton, and that's not all. That's like a third of only the Pathfinder stuff. And
so you guys are busy. Well, I do have a quick little Pathfinder story. My colleague David Romano, shout out to David Romano, he managed to convince his local synagogue, where he's a teacher at the synagogue, to let him teach the Hebrew class through Pathfinder, where they have to go, where they have a magical porthole where they go back to ancient Israel and have to speak Hebrew to people. So it's being and Pathfinder is the system that they're using to play it, which I think is
so
pretty
that's really great.
Do you know like what kind of classes and ancestries, or did he homebrew some brand new ones for?
He did. No, they have like there's only like humans, but they have like fighter and you know like the normal basic ones. And you know the priests are the obviously are rabbis, and they go around and they meet all the ancient characters.
Do they have special archetypes that teach about things like a Maccabee archetype, where you when you buy one potion or oil, it lasts for 8 uses?
This is something that I actually said to him. I said you should just write this as a campaign, because it sounds pretty awesome. Where they have to go back and rescue people from the temple from Babylon, crazy stuff. But yeah,
Nebuchadnezzar.
Nice.
Yep. So my real question is, does it have Old Testament angels with the tons of eyes and wings, like as described?
Yes.
Because that's really important to me. That's awesome.
It has all the stuff, and the best part is that it's done on those poor kids would have to be in a boring Hebrew class, but instead they have to speak Hebrew in order to be able to. I think the story is that they were all Hellenized Jewish people, so English is Greek. So they go back through a portal to the ancient times where they have to use their Hebrew in order to talk to people at this time, because they're actually only speak Greek. But yeah, that's my interesting Pathfinder story about
awesome.
That my colleague is using it. So Varn, it has been
that's really cool.
It's been a fantastic episode. Really enjoyed having you on. Really appreciate you coming on, and I hope down the road you'll come back on and you can update us on how things are going with the union, how things are with the freelancers. Let us know about your work. Varn, anything to add?
Nope. I've actually been checking out some Starfinder stuff, because that's significantly different than anything else I play. So I'm glad to know about that scenario, and I'm actually kind of excited because Starfinder is a real growth area for Paizo. I think it's a growth area for a lot of role players. There has finally been recently, not just with Paizo, but in general, a lot of space role playing coming out. Maybe because we have hit peak high medieval fantasy. I don't know, but for a few months, because we know how these cycles go, If we peak on something in RPG land, it'll just die down for a year or two and come back. But yeah, I'm interested in checking that out myself. So I would also encourage people to check that out. I have a complicated relationship with Pathfinder because I both enjoy the crunchiness of the rules, but also it can be a lot. And I was very glad when we shifted to second edition because it kind of needed a reset.
Yeah.
That's where I was too. So.
Doing that reset.
Yeah. So I'm excited. There's some other things we'll probably be in touch in the future because there's some things we didn't touch with. I haven't even asked about the part of the business. Like, well, Paizo's in that area where Amazon discounts your books. How bad does that make everybody's life suck? So yeah, because oddly enough, the smaller companies actually doesn't happen that much with because they're so small. But yeah, there's all kinds of areas we could talk about. But we're at an hour. But I'm really excited for Starfinder stuff in general. So I'm glad that you guys endorse something for us to check out.
Awesome. Isis, would you say that 4-parter is a good place for Varn's group to start?
I think it's certainly I don't want to over recommend it. I think it's a great 4-parter. It starts at level 1. The final one
That's all you need.
The final one is level 3 though. That was the one I wrote. I would definitely look if you want to really get started in Starfinder. There are some really early Starfinder scenarios that are a great introduction to both the system and the game. And if you want, you can even pull the Starfinder Society stuff out of it, or at least out of some of them. I've done it before. I introduced some of my players in a home game using, I can't remember the number for it, but the scenario called Acts of Association. It's a great scenario for just starting out. You show a diplomat around Absalom Station. It's a great yeah.
Something tells me that Fly Free or Die adventure path might be up the political alley of your group,
yes.
Given that it's the massively anti-capitalist sort of rogues and misfits who are trying to get by.
There you go, Varn. You've got yourself some space revolutionaries.
Yeah,
that'll be fun.
Some space revolutionaries. We just better not let Pascal play because he'll just get the machetes out and start just taking down everybody. Yeah. So I am we have a colleague, Pascal. I don't think he's ever played a role play game, but I
would doubt it.
I would doubt it, but I definitely think he would be a murder hobo if he was going to play a game. So we are recording this, guys, in advance. So all you watchers and listeners out there, we are recording this on Friday the 12th, but it is being broadcast on Wednesday. So for all you This Is Revolution people, because I'm in the past talking about the future, yesterday, not my yesterday at this moment, but the yesterday when you're watching me, you will be able to check out our discussion with Sam Cedar from the Majority Report. And on tomorrow, not my tomorrow, but your tomorrow in the future, you will be able to listen to Chelsea Schleiber, who is going to be talking about her book on the Haitian Revolution. So that's what's going on. This is Revolution, yesterday and tomorrow in the future. And also VarnVlog. What's happening at VarnVlog?
VarnVlog, there'll be nothing on the YouTube channel before this, but there will be 2 podcasts released, one for patrons, which will be a special roundtable on the movie network, which also feels relevant to all these discussions today, but for different reasons. And then we will be releasing an episode on the audio format on the Monday before the future. This is confusing. with Conan Neutron, which for those who watch us on videos have already been released. That's timey-wimey stuff that we have to deal with. But there you go.
We're in the crazy space-time continuum where we're in the past, talking about things that are yet to happen from the future when you're watching. Well, if that's not confusing enough, I don't know what is. So thank you once again to our guests. And as we say on This Is Revolution, we are
just like the new Starfinder class coming in Galactic Magic.